I sensed a shift the instant Robert strolled into my workspace, carrying himself like he'd just received a personal blessing from some tech mogul. Barely out of university, with that overconfident, toothpaste ad smile, he settled into the visitor's chair before my desk and declared, "So, you're the one I'm supposed to be mirroring, eh?" Mirroring. Sure, more like a predator with a new employee badge. Leland had backed me into a corner in the kitchen that morning, smelling of kilo body spray and bad news, smiling like he'd just invented the wheel. "We just need a bit of a safety net, Susan, in case you ever decide to take a holiday," he'd said, using the tone of a man who thinks using the word redundancy doesn't make him sound like a layoff announcement in a blazer. I hadn't taken a holiday in 4 years. Not a single sick day. I once powered through a dual ear infection and a fractured wrist because financial reports don't pause just because you took a tumble off your porch trying to scare a raccoon away from your basil. So yes, I knew the holiday excuse was nonsense. Robert wasn't here to learn. He was here to take my job. To compound the insult, the young upstart narrated my every action, as if he were creating a how-to video. "Oh, custom scripts. Cool. So you built this entire validation system from scratch?" I just gave a slight nod. He didn't have to be aware that I'd poured months into automating our ancient expense forwarding protocol, all because Leland once had a meltdown over a 12-mileage reimbursement that was processed late. Robert pecked at his keyboard like a caffeinated squirrel, peppering me with questions that sounded like they were generated by an AI after a few drinks. All the while, Leland would drift up behind us like a ghost-like autovac. "Hey, Susan, quick question. What level of clearance are you granting Robert for the vendor portal?" "View only," I replied without glancing up. He didn't approve. I could feel his displeasure before I saw it, like a whiff of cheap aftershave and professional sabotage. "You might as well grant him full access. He'll require it sooner or later." I smiled and didn't lift a single finger. "And hey, since you're already caught up in this drama with me, maybe you could do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and help me get to my first 10,000 subscribers. It costs you nothing, unlike Leland's integrity. Plus, it signals to the algorithm that you enjoy stories where arrogant individuals get precisely what they deserve." Regardless, I continued to play my assigned role, diligent, supportive Susan, guiding Robert through the inner workings of the company's financial framework as if everything were normal. But I was observing. I observed that Robert knew the location of the vendor payment forms before I had a chance to show him. I observed that Leland repeatedly checked the logs of our training sessions on our internal chat. I observed when Robert inquired if we maintained legacy payroll archives from 2020 and gave me a conspiratorial wink, as though we were in on a secret together. We weren't, but I was about to ensure we would be. At one point, Robert attempted to build rapport by calling Leland the goat. I nearly spit out my Aquavel. Leland once printed a meme, believing it was a slide for his upcoming presentation. If Leland's the goat, then my beagle is a theoretical physicist. But I grinned. I instructed. I detailed formulas and approval chains, and all the areas you avoid unless you're prepared to justify your actions to a dozen furious auditors. And through it all, I let Leland believe he was 2 steps ahead. The truth is, I'd already turned the table over. The fusion place Leland chose for the team lunch was one of those hyper-modern spots, with poured concrete floors and ficus trees in minimalist pots, just ostentatious enough for him to feign sophistication. He kept describing it as authentic, as if he hadn't just searched for Japanese restaurant impressive for a CEO. I arrived early. Old habits are hard to break, and I prefer to map out the exits when I'm entering a hostile environment. The CEO, Mr. Kurosawa, came in 5 minutes after me, wearing a crisp suit, projecting a serene demeanor, with eyes that seemed to have already catalogued every vulnerability in the space. Akimi, his trusted aide and interpreter, was unfortunately stuck due to a cancelled flight. Leland, naturally, saw this as his moment to shine. "Guess I'll have to bust out my LinguaLink skills," he quipped, giving the CEO a nudge as he took his seat, his collar already damp with sweat. We placed our orders. I chose tea and vegetable tempura, as I was too keyed up to eat. Leland was already 2 sack and beer combinations in, laughing at his own quips and spouting rudimentary Japanese, with the assurance of someone who once dated a barmaid in Ginza and considers it cultural immersion. It was somewhere between his 3rd botched pronunciation of a simple Japanese term and a half-boast about streamlining our legacy systems that he leaned closer to Mr. Kurosawa and dropped the bomb. "She's a bit old-fashioned. She'll be gone by next quarter." He smirked and looked directly at me, his eyes clouded with conceit, believing he'd just uttered something clever that I wouldn't understand. But I caught every word. What Leland didn't know, because he never bothered to ask, because people like him never do, is that I spent 5 years in Kyoto, living off convenience store onigiri and Huawei 280 ramen. While I completed my master's in financial engineering at Kyodai, I immersed myself in Japanese until my dreams had subtitles, handling pension registrations and digital payroll verifications in kanji, so complex it would make most Westerners weep into their accounting software. So, when Leland labeled me old-fashioned, I smiled, and when he declared I'd be gone next quarter, I sipped my tea with the serenity of a person curating a funeral playlist. You see, something inside me clicked into place right then. Not rage, not immediately, just focus. The kind that settles in your bones like ice. I wasn't going to debate. I wasn't going to justify my position. I was going to dismantle his career, silently, methodically, in a language he would never comprehend. I tuned out the remainder of the lunch. I let Leland drone on about performance indicators and digital transformations, like a man who had just learned a new set of buzzwords. I watched as he mansplained our own platform to the CEO and passed around a printed deck with charts I'd designed, but his name in the header. I saw the look Mr. Kurosawa shot him, discreet but incisive. He wasn't impressed, just patiently tolerating the display. As lunch concluded, Leland patted my shoulder, as if he were bestowing a blessing upon a servant. "Great job not getting lost during the Japanese parts," he said with a chuckle. "Oh, I found it incredibly informative," I answered, giving a slight bow. He didn't catch the sharpness in my tone. Most men of his type don't. And as I stepped out into the light rain, umbrella open, I muttered something just for myself in Japanese. My turn, because that was the instant I ceased to be his subordinate and began to be his downfall. I dedicated that weekend to a bottle of Malbec and our company's internal payroll records, which I had displayed on my personal monitor, sifting through metadata like a vengeful forensic examiner. I wasn't seeking resolution. I was seeking ammunition. The first thing that stood out was that Leland had manually tweaked his year-end bonus 4 days after the official deadline. It was cleverly done, hidden within the regular activity of Q4 budget reallocations. He had employed an override function, normally reserved for critical adjustments, like corrections for parental leave or retroactive pay increases, the sort of action that goes unnoticed if the person with access is trusted. Regrettably for Leland, I was the one who designed that access. Over the following week, I filled a private document I titled Leland's Legacy with damning evidence. Vendor ID 8483. Corvidian Strategies. $7,250 disbursed in Q3. No corresponding invoice, no listed contact, no signed agreement in our system. Vendor ID 9211. Oakhaven Group. Address listed is a Hive collective that closed in 2021. Project Keystone, officially completed last year, suddenly had $18,000 in consulting fees, backdated to February. Leland wasn't just taking a little extra. He was systematically draining funds, and with the subtlety of someone who thinks VPN means very personal network. But I didn't press the button yet. I continued training Robert as if nothing was amiss, showing him the procedures, smiling through his inquiries. "Wow, Susan, you wrote this whole reconciliation script?" he would ask. "Mm-hmm," I'd respond, taking a sip of the coffee I'd started making with decaf just to maintain my composure. He once suggested simplifying the approval controls. I paused for a moment. "Certainly," I said, while already adjusting his permissions, so that any modifications he attempted would be automatically routed to an administrative inbox only I could access. Bit by bit, I gave him more leeway. I allowed him to feel and control. I offered him a taste of administrator-level privileges, all within a carefully monitored, time-stamped, and isolated environment. I needed Leland to believe Robert was progressing, that his protégé was a quick study, and that he would soon be capable of replacing me. I even began to mislabel columns during my demonstrations, just to see who was paying attention. Robert wasn't, but Leland was, taking detailed notes. I once saw him reading my private chat messages after work, oblivious to the fact that our system flags when someone views a conversation not directed at them. I screenshotted that as well. The whole time, I operated like a mist, soundless, unhurried, leaving no trace. Every receipt, every bonus adjustment, every fabricated timestamp, I recorded it, translated it, and annotated it with context. Leland's pay raises, Robert's unusually rapid promotion through approval levels, notes on emails I was certain Leland had blind copied to the Tokyo office to take credit for system enhancements I had spent 3 fiscal quarters developing. You see, a unique kind of lucidity arrives when you accept that your position isn't worth fighting for, but your self-respect is. And self-respect, when properly utilized, becomes the most refined form of justice. Leland once remarked that what he appreciated about me was that I didn't cause trouble. He was correct. I was the tide, and he never even saw it coming in. It struck me mid-investigation, somewhere between a fraudulent vendor agreement and a bonus request marked urgent in a font that was a crime against business etiquette. Akemi Sato, the CEO's long-serving assistant. When Mr. Kurosawa first assumed his role, she managed his U.S. operations like a covert agent. She translated executive meetings on the fly, spotted errors in financial statements before they were finalized, and could silence a room full of managers with a single look. A true professional. She had stepped back from her public-facing duties when Kurosawa reduced his travel during the pandemic. Word was, she remained a powerful figure in the Tokyo office, discreet, effective, and fiercely dedicated to her boss. This made her precisely the allies I required. I searched through an old email archive until I located her last known contact information. I sent a brief message. Simple, professional, and in Japanese. "It has been some time. This is Susan. I have something I would like to briefly discuss with you." She responded 3 hours later. The same direct politeness I remembered. No playful emojis. No "sent from my mobile" signature. Just a brief sentence. "Of course. I am available." We connected via a secure video call 2 evenings later. I was in my apartment, clad in a sweatshirt and house shoes. She was in what appeared to be a sleek Tokyo conference room, the city lights shimmering behind her. I didn't reveal everything at once. That's not how you communicate with someone like Akemi. You present the information and let it settle. "I've identified a pattern of vendor payments," I began, "that do not correspond with project schedules, and bonuses are being adjusted outside of compliance periods." She didn't react, just gave a single, slow nod. "Are these discrepancies frequent?" "Yes, and the person authorizing them is Leland Croft, VP of Operations." Akemi let out a soft breath. Not surprised, not yet convinced, but attentive. I shared one file, and only one. A redacted payment spreadsheet showing dates, sums, and system data. No finger-pointing, just facts. She tilted her head slightly. "Do you have further documentation?" "I do." And from that point on, I had an ally. Over the next 10 days, I fed her information in scheduled drops, edited spreadsheets, comparison logs, a compressed folder of overwritten timestamps Leland thought he had erased. Spoiler, he hadn't. I translated every file name into formal Japanese. I added explanatory notes for corporate procedures, matching our internal approval codes with their Tokyo counterparts. I didn't add my opinion. I didn't plead. I simply offered the truth like a surgical instrument, cold, precise, and undeniable. Akemi never offered praise, never became overly friendly, but I noticed the subtle shifts. Her replies grew shorter, more direct. She started requesting raw data files and original metadata exports. That's how you know someone is constructing a case, when they ask for the source material, not just the highlights. On the surface, nothing else changed. Leland continued to behave as if he were delivering a motivational speech no one had requested. Robert kept loudly consuming yogurt beside me, while feigning comprehension of advanced spreadsheet functions. The office operated like any other underpaid weekday, but I was no longer struggling to stay afloat. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of resolve. My breathing became steadier. I now had a direct line to Tokyo, a real one, not through our chat system, not through Leland, but through Akemi. That meant every piece of data I logged carried weight. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was planting dynamite in the foundations, quietly and deliberately. Leland believed I was isolated, that no one would ever take my side. But someone was listening, and she was as fluent in silence as I was. It arrived on a Tuesday, as most corporate betrayals do. That morning, a calendar invitation appeared that I hadn't created. Kickoff. Project Keystone Transition Owner. Robert Shaw. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Project Keystone was my creation, the one I had meticulously built from scratch during the lockdown, putting in 18-hour days in sweatpants and messy hair, while Leland sent me quick questions at midnight. I had streamlined 3 years of inefficient code, integrated it with payroll, and reconstructed our validation process to withstand the most rigorous audit. It was my masterpiece in a spreadsheet. And now Robert, who couldn't even articulate the distinction between gross and net income, was its new owner. No discussion, no transition meeting, just a digital pink slip. Leland didn't even possess the courage to inform me personally. Instead, he meandered past my desk, coffee mug in hand, with that self-satisfied 2-sip smile that made me want to launch a stapler at his head. "Hey, Susan," he began. "Hope you don't mind. I thought you could use a break from the workload. Robert has been eager for more responsibility." I smiled as if my teeth weren't about to shatter. "Of course," I said, happy to provide support from the background. He nodded, as if I had just gracefully surrendered my life's work instead of documenting his professional demise. 2 hours later, the real blow came. An accidental email, copied to the Tokyo board. Subject: Payroll Optimization Initiative. Early Successes. Inside were 3 paragraphs of Leland congratulating himself on updating outdated systems, capped with a bullet point that read, "Project Keystone Transition, now complete under my supervision. Initial data indicates significant efficiency improvements." He called it his supervision. I didn't yell. I didn't shed a tear. I saved a PDF of the email from my archives, renamed it Arrogant Fool IVO3 Final, and carried on. Then I noticed it. The attachment at the very bottom, a compliance form, ostensibly confirming that the new procedure adhered to both U.S. and Japanese regulations. It appeared legitimate. The wording was precise. The dates were plausible. But something in my gut told me it was wrong, like when a stage magician says, "Pick a card," and you know the entire deck is stacked. I examined the file's metadata. The signature for the compliance officer was lifted from an older document I had submitted 6 months prior. The approval code was a duplicate. The timestamp had been altered using a development script I had personally hidden in the test environment for version control. Leland hadn't just faked a document. He had faked my document. He assumed I wouldn't notice, assumed I wouldn't care, that I had already given up like a good little legacy employee, and started planning my departure. I messaged Akemi, "Please examine the attached file. The template is correct, but the contents and authorization have been fabricated. There was no response for an hour. Then, a single word, acknowledged. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't express doubt. She forwarded it directly to the legal department. I wasn't copied, of course, but I recognized the signs, the delay, the silence. That's how the corporate machine operates when it's preparing to strike. Leland paraded around the office that day, as if he'd just achieved a major breakthrough. Robert walked by my desk, offering an awkward, triumphant look. "Hey, Susan, if you have any Keystone files, I could really use them, for a smooth transition." "Of course," I replied, my voice as sweet as venom. "Let me gather the sanitized versions for you." I created a new folder on my desktop and named it Scorched Earth, organizing every file, screenshot, and audit log into a final, comprehensive package. Leland had made his final error, and I was no longer collecting evidence. I was preparing an indictment. The invitation arrived in our inboxes late on a Friday afternoon, just as everyone was mentally checking out for the weekend. Subject: Q4 Efficiency Strategy. Attendance mandatory. Inside, the language was deliberately unclear. Cost optimization. Organizational alignment. Leland's favorite phrases. And there, 3 names were quietly listed under transition consideration candidates. Mine was positioned last, as if he were attempting to soften the blow with an alphabetical insult. I didn't show any emotion. I didn't forward the email. I simply took a screenshot, saved it to my just-in-case folder, and shut my laptop with the composure of someone who already knew how the final scene would play out. Because that morning, at 4:42 a.m. Portland time, just after the lunch hour in Tokyo, an email had been dispatched from a secure Tokyo address to every board member on record. It had no subject line, only attachments. The first was a spreadsheet titled Unauthorized Adjustments 2022-2023. The second was a PDF labeled Compliance Forgery, Leland Croft. The third was a compressed folder named Full Audit Trail, Internal Use Only. Each file was flawlessly translated. Headers were color-coded. Timelines were clearly mapped. The approval metadata was pristine. There was nothing sensational about it. Just cold, hard accuracy. The kind of proof that doesn't shout, but rather whispers, "Look more closely." By the time I entered the efficiency meeting on Monday morning, the boardroom was full and unusually silent. Leland stood near the head of the table, clicking his presentation remote, as if he were auditioning for a motivational speaker role. His tie was askew, his smile a little too forced. I selected a seat in the front row, right in the middle. I crossed my legs and placed my hands on a notepad I had no intention of using. I wanted him to be looking at me when the ground fell away. Leland advanced to the first slide. Cost containment objectives. Then the second. Operational realignment. On the third slide, his voice wavered slightly. And finally, key restructuring areas to streamline redundancies and promote fresh innovation. He paused. "Before we proceed, I want to, address an issue that was brought to our attention this morning." There it was. He attempted to dismiss it as a minor administrative error. We received an email containing some internal documents that seemed to have been altered. We are collaborating with legal to... The CEO, who had been silent until then, raised his hand. "No, we are not collaborating with legal," he stated evenly. "They are collaborating with us." A single sentence, as sharp as a blade to Leland's credibility. Leland blinked. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by..." Another board member pushed a printed copy of the audit trail across the table. "Did you approve these transactions?" Leland reached for it with the caution of a man trying to avoid leaving fingerprints. Opposite him, I watched the scene freeze as his world unraveled. Every hesitation, every darting glance, it was all there in high-definition corporate silence, the kind of quiet that descends only when a predator realizes he has become the prey. The cap of my thermos made a soft click as I took a slow sip. Mint chamomile, Leland's favorite. He used to say it helped with his public speaking nerves. I suppose it wasn't working anymore. I didn't need to say anything. I just sat there, smiling. Not a smug or loud smile, just ready, letting the trap close in, letting the email do the work. Because the only thing more powerful than justice is a perfectly laid trap, springing shut in utter silence. He continued to stall, like a man caught with incriminating evidence, and no explanation. His voice grew strained with each excuse, attempting to shift the focus to broader organizational goals and forward-thinking leadership, as if corporate jargon could negate the facts. But the CEO was unyielding. He just stared, unblinking, at a single line in the document. One line, one transaction, one name. "Mr. Croft," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Can you explain this transaction?" Leland's mouth moved, but no sound came out. That transaction was a year-end adjustment related to vendor setup. The reconciliation team signed off on it. I have the documentation somewhere. His hands rifled through a folder like a magician searching for a prop that wasn't there. I think Susan may have approved it. I didn't even flinch. And at that moment, as if on cue, she entered, Akimi, 5 feet of quiet authority, dressed in a sharp navy blazer and radiating controlled indignation. She didn't acknowledge anyone, didn't smile. She walked past the surprised executives, directly to the head of the table, and presented the CEO with a navy folder bearing the Tokyo office's seal. No one stirred. Even Leland was frozen, one hand still inside his folder, as if holding perfectly still might make her disappear. The CEO opened the folder and read in silence. His expression remained unchanged, but he passed the documents to his left. The information rippled through the room, each board member reading, glancing at Leland, and then passing it along. Akimi stepped forward, calm, composed. She opened her mouth and delivered the sentence that would end his career. "This manager, Leland Croft, has defrauded this company and insulted your judgment. See attached documentation." She didn't raise her voice, didn't hesitate. She stated it, as if she were giving a weather report. Leland looked as if someone had just pulled his plug. His mouth hung open. His eyes darted around, searching for an ally, a counter-argument, even a hint of sympathy. He found none. Someone cleared their throat. Papers shifted. A chair groaned. And me? I didn't utter a word. I didn't need to. I just adjusted my position slightly, straightened the sleeve of my blazer, and looked him directly in the eye. He knew. He absolutely knew. Akimi placed the folder down with methodical precision, turned toward the exit, and as she passed me, our eyes met. No wink, no smirk, just a slight affirming nod, the kind of acknowledgement shared between two women who are fluent in strategy, silence, and survival. Leland made one last desperate attempt. This is obviously some kind of personal attack. She's been working against me for weeks. The CEO raised his hand again. That's enough. Leland sank back into his chair, breathing like a man who just realized the air in the room no longer belonged to him, and the room remained still, because everyone knew the outcome had already been decided. Leland must have realized it was finished. But men of his type don't surrender gracefully. They struggle. They grasp at any remaining shred of authority they believe they possess. He leaned forward, as if he held a final winning card. "With all due respect," he started, the classic opening of a man about to be profoundly disrespectful. "I believe Susan has been actively undermining my leadership for months. She has delayed handovers, restricted access. Now she has gone behind our backs to undermine my relationship with Tokyo." He said, "relationship," as if he and the board were in some sort of complicated long-distance partnership. The room remained silent. No audible reactions. No restless movements. Just the heavy, still atmosphere of people observing a failing system. I rose to my feet. No haste. No drama. Just enough time for every person in the room to turn their attention to me. Then I bowed slightly. A formal, correct bow. And in flawless, clear Japanese, I said, "When you joked about dismissing me, You overlooked one thing. I understand your language far better than you understand your own position. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the junior board members gasped. Someone in the back actually whispered, "Damn." Leland just stood there, frozen, blinking as if he could somehow turn back time. The CEO didn't look at Leland. He looked at me, and he gave a single, definitive nod. Security didn't escort Leland out. That would have been too dramatic, allowing him to play the victim. No, it was more humiliating. 2 internal security officers quietly stepped forward and gestured toward the door. Leland's mouth opened again, but he was speechless. He gathered his laptop like a child being told to leave the playground and walked toward the exit, as if he expected someone, anyone, to intervene. No one did. Once the door clicked shut, the CEO addressed the board. "Let's proceed," he said plainly. Akimi distributed a short document outlining internal restructuring. At the bottom of the first page, under Revised Reporting Structures, was my name. Title: Director of Financial Systems. Reporting to Tokyo HQ. I had signed the contract 2 weeks earlier. I collected my folder, took one final look around the room, at the executives still trying to comprehend what had just transpired, at the empty chair Leland had vacated, at the folder Akimi had placed on the table like a headstone. Then I walked out. No triumphant strut, no wide grin, just quiet, fluent victory. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped back into position. The meeting went on, but I was no longer a part of it. I had moved beyond it,